All right. Well, like I said, I'm going to start off with a brief introduction. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie McGrath Novak. I coordinate the Colorado Forest Collaboratives Network. We're kind of similar to the Western Collaborative Conservation Network, but if you picture it on a Colorado statewide scale and just focusing on forestry specifically. So, yeah, if you haven't met me yet and you're in Colorado, please reach out. I'm going to be guest facilitating this webinar today. Today's presentation is called Honest, Transparent Conversations, Keys for Effective Tribal Collaboration. So a quick introduction to the WCCN, or the Western Collaborative Conservation Network. Some of you may be new here, or some of you might just like a refresher. The big green circle in the middle shows our mission statement, which is to promote and support community-based collaborative conservation efforts that strengthen and sustain healthy landscapes, vibrant communities, and thriving economies. The two primary ways that we do this at WCCN are through opportunities to connect and build community, and through learning opportunities like today, through our newsletter, through our biannual confluence, and through other tools developed by the various working groups. So if you want to learn more, here's a little QR code, and also I'm sure you'll get a follow-up email with all of this information. All right, and with that, I'm going to introduce you to today's speaker, James Calabaza. So James was born and raised in New Mexico and comes with direct experience working with tribes and understanding the traditional knowledge as it pertains to their unique values and governance systems. After working with the government sector, James realized that his heart belongs to the nonprofit world. Love that. As the Indigenous Lands Program Director at Trees, Water, and People, James provides much needed insight and experience on working with tribal governments that uphold traditional ethics of governance, leadership, and land management methodologies. His deep-rooted experiences and cultural values strengthens relationships by building trust with tribes, solidifying strong collaborative networks, integrating traditional landscape conservation values, and promoting Indigenous-led restoration projects. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and let James share his screen with you and take it away.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much, Katie. Let me just pull up my slides and well, thanks so much for that cool icebreaker activity, Katie. I love that, you just kind of anticipate to see everyone's responses come up from those questions. And thank you for the introduction. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all doing well and staying cool. It's definitely a hot one down here in the Southwest. I'm calling in from Cortez, Colorado today. As Katie mentioned, my name is James Calabaza, and I am the Indigenous Lands Program Director for Trees, Water, and People. I come from the Pueblo of Santo Domingo, one of the 19 pueblos in New Mexico. And, I have the privilege of being able to work with my very own community and others locally on post-fire restoration efforts, but also looking at a very larger collaborative landscape approach to climate, how we can combat and tackle climate change impacts. But today I really just want to provide some tips, tools, some experiences that I've been fortunate enough to pick up through my time working with Trees, Water, and People, as well as the United States Department of Agriculture in terms of how to really move these opportunities of collaboration with tribes forward in a respectful and transparent way. And I apologize in advance. I try to cram as much information into my slides so you all can walk away with valuable information, hopefully something enlightening in terms of like why this work is important in regards to collaborating and building these relationships with tribes. So if you do see my slides, packed with content, apologies. I just wanted to get as much as I can within a 30-minute time frame. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I'll first go ahead and start off with giving an overview of Trees, Water, and People. Trees, Water, and People is a 26-year-old non-governmental organization based out of Fort Collins, Colorado. I saw a lot of familiar friends and partners on this call, so thank you so much for As a nonprofit, we specifically engage and work with indigenous communities across the Americas. Our mission statement is to improve people's lives by helping those people and communities protect, conserve, and manage the natural resources on which their long-term well-being depends. So we really find it imperative to get the local people actively involved in the projects that we help sponsor or co-sponsor on that specific landscape or region. Our community engagement model, I'm pretty sure most of you have seen a similar snapshot of this kind of engagement model elsewhere, but we like to say, to the left, you have that lowest form of community engagement involvement, which is more of an informative approach. Trees, water, and people, however, we like to say our strength and our role is really coming in to help build these collaborations and empower the local people to take on, a lot of these, stewardship practices within their own context and, addressing their main priorities. That puts trees, water, and people in a unique position where we act as a convener in where we bring people together. We bring federal agencies, state agencies, non-tribal NGOs together with the tribal nations to, at a table to discuss those key important components to long-term conservation and land management practices. Our Indigenous Lands Program is one of two programs housed under Trees, Water, and People. Our other program is our Central America program that works with Indigenous communities in Central America. But today I'm really going to focus on the Indigenous Lands Program, which, works with right now federally recognized tribes in the Southwest United States. So it's our domestic-based program. And our vision is to help blend Western science and traditional ecological knowledge together as a really powerful motive to move and improve climate resiliency in tribal communities for the long-term sustainability and protection of their cultural lifeways and their lands. We exist today is because we've identified through channels and through conversations that there's not many organizations out there right now who have this type of opportunity to invest and work with tribal nations through this, really authentic and transparent ways. So Trees, Water, and People is taking on this opportunity to really build out a model that we hope can be replicated across the different regions and the different collaborative networks that you may all, represent on this call. So really our Indigenous Lands Program is consisted of indigenous native practitioners, fire managers, outreach managers who have really a keen value and leadership in regards to these different kind of tactics we want to improve with tribal nations. We have right now, our Indigenous Lands Program has three kind of focus areas in terms of the projects we do. Our first and probably biggest one is our reforestation and post-fire watershed recovery. I would say 75% of our work is focused on watershed scale recovery, especially the landscapes that have been impacted by high severity, high intense wildfires in the Southwest, as well as, in our very own state of Colorado. Bison restoration and cultural preservation is our second project area we really have been enhancing and amplifying over the last year, especially with how the Department of Interior is starting to really advocate for the movement of funding and resources to bring bison back onto the landscape and improve tribal resiliency through this partnership. And then lastly, our riparian restoration. We obviously a lot of tribal nations in the Southwest, their homelands, ancestral homelands and today's tribal trust lands are housed within the very arid Southwest ecosystem. So it's important to really protect these riparian systems for long-term water conservation and the preservation for a lot of plant flora and fauna species within these ecosystems. Just a quick snapshot of our kind of indigenous framework we used for engagement. We see through the guidance and knowledge sharing of our tribal partners, we've come to learn that, through the indigenous knowledge system, everything is interconnected. As you can see in this graphic here, everything from people to worldview to knowledge all has a role in this holistic model towards engagement and planning for conservation-led efforts. And then to the left, you'll see three key kind of terminologies that our program tries, at its best to really focus on through our extensive networks and our restoration projects, which are how can we provide support and assist communities that can be led by indigenous peoples, which is the per indigenous. That's kind of our long-term goal, is to create opportunities and projects that can be led by the local indigenous and tribal communities. So now, like, how does TWP build these relationships with tribes? It takes time. I'll be blunt about it. It takes a lot of preparation, takes patience, but ultimately it's also about respecting tribal sovereignty. Respecting the sovereignty in terms of timelines towards decision-making, understanding their governance structures are all key components to ways you can build a good relationship with the tribe. You also need to understand that not tribal nations are not monolithic. We all come from different creation stories, different ways we connect to the lands, how we use the land, because that's one of the biggest myths in our society, is that tribes all are a very monolithic system, which we are not. And that itself alone is associated with its own challenges. So as mentioned, it's not easy work, but it's beautiful work. So understanding the differences in values and systems amongst tribal nations is important. You want to create these, opportunities with non-linear approaches, meaning, you want to keep an open mind, be open to new project ideas, even if it's uncomfortable for you. Like one of the biggest human traits is that, we're always open to growth and learning something new. And I think that's what working with tribal nations can bring to a lot of our conservation-based work, is new ideas. We have been able to, be resilient towards a shifting climate and other factors for, a millennia. I want to launch those collaborations with humble beginnings. It may take a year or two to consider, identifying what a first project could be. It taken us 2 years to first kind of get established with the tribe, approach them about who we are, what we do, and then eventually 2 years later, we were able to create this small scale reforestation project that till today has really grown into a regional dynamic opportunity for that tribe and multiple other tribes. And as mentioned earlier, flexibility and preparation. Have flexibility in regards to your schedule, to the conversations, and being prepared is also an important component to how Trees, Water, and People, we build these relationships. But collaborative capacity, why is it important for, Trees, Water, and People, or even for tribal nations? We may all possibly agree that, this issue we're facing with climate change, it doesn't see boundaries. We're like the only biotic species on this planet that sees boundaries on a map. Animals, wildlife, fish, birds, they don't see these fences or, these boundaries. We're the only biotic being on this planet. And so when you look at the factors of climate change, a fire is not going to stop up against one, land management's jurisdiction. It's going to continue going on. And so for tribal peoples, it's important that they come together for the unification of sharing and leveraging resources, knowledge systems, labor and capacity, and it's going to take years to be able to fight and mitigate these impacts and recover from these impacts as well. But taking a unified approach in this, collaborative space is important for the rebalancing and rejustification of socio-environmental issues. There's been a lot of great work right now happening in the policy world, in the funding world, regarding how tribes are being recognized as are recognized as, the potential leaders towards our how we're going to face climate change. So unification of voices is very imperative to Trees, Water, and People, and to our tribal our tribal partners as well. I Now I just want to quickly shift to kind of highlight a case study of how Trees, Water, and People has been able to participate and work with three tribal nations on a common issue and looking at solutions to combat and mitigate that common issue. So the Tri-Pueblo Coalition is consisted of the pueblos of Cochiti, Santo Domingo, and Jemez, but as well as Trees, Water, and People and High Watermark LLC, which is a Native American women-owned engineering firm in Bernalillo, New Mexico, where these five entities have come together to really look at how can we share these same resources, how can we have a unified vision towards developing a long-term strategy to protect our lands, our communities, preserve cultural lifeways, and kind of demonstrate to the rest of the conservation world that by doing collaborative work through a traditional indigenous framework, we can accomplish a lot. So the purpose of the Tri-Pueblo Coalition was to address the issues around post-fire impacts. After the 2011 Las Conchas wildfire in the Jemez Mountains of north central New Mexico, the tribes lost a lot of cultural and traditional grounds where they would go and harvest, hunt, ceremonial use. All of that was, decimated from this fire. And, 10 years later, that landscape had like little to no regeneration happening. Federal agencies were, kind of neglecting that landscape because they had other priorities that they wanted to focus on. And so now these three communities, along with Trees, Water, and People and High Watermark, are really advancing these efforts at a local and regional scale by boosting the priority that tribes have to these landscapes for various reasons. Through this formulation of the coalition, we've been able to elevate traditional ecological knowledge that is now being absorbed into a lot of forest management plans within the Santa Fe National Forest or other surrounding forests. As mentioned earlier, it allows for that space and the room for social environmental equity by for tribal nations being placed on reservations and taking that opportunity to work and steward their ancestral lands has really allowed for the imbalance of and healthy forests to take over in a lot of these landscapes. So the tribal nations are really focusing on how to get back within these frameworks to start implementing better restoration projects. And then lastly, I put here for this Tri-Pueblo Coalition, one of the reasons we were formulated was to really guide that data governance and knowledge sharing to be valued and respected. I know Colorado State University, University of Arizona, and others are really doing an exceptional job in terms of advocating for indigenous data governance and how that data is owned by the tribes, how it can be accessed, how it could be shared. And so that's one of the priorities we are looking at in terms of elevating is that we believe as more and more projects take place across, the regional or, Western United States, is that there should be an indigenous data governance clause or, some type of priority included in those projects. Just a quick map for those who are visual learners like myself, who or just see things more visually. The Tri-Pueblo Coalition is the pueblos of Jemez, Cochiti, and Santo Domingo. Historically, their ancestral lands are between current day Santa Fe and Albuquerque, the two metro areas of New Mexico. And then this graphic to the right here just kind of shows a more in-depth kind of view of the diversity of land management agencies and holders in that Jemez landscape. So the Tri-Pueblo Coalition does play an important role in advocating and working with this larger East Jemez Resource Council and other, conservation groups in terms of advocacy and consultation. So now I'm gonna go more into some of these building blocks and how to build these collaborations and partnerships. first step, I think, is probably the most important is, to build strong relationships. Relationships create the foundation where stakeholders can, really be transparent and implement long-term effective stewardship practices and projects on the ground. Through these collaboration, it incorporates heavily on community participation. So if you can go back to that graphic earlier when, that talks about the levels of community engagement, by building relationships, you're not only collaborating with the people, but you're empowering them in ways that can really boost local buy-in and support for these projects. Through through strong relationships, you build and maintain those productive, working relationships for long term. And that's one of the key things about working with tribes is that you never want to approach it in a very narrow or short term window approach. You're probably going to lose a lot of respect and lose a lot of support from tribes if all you want to do is come in for one project and then say that's it. You have to be committed with consistent, follow-ups with monitoring or reporting. And that itself, just demonstrates back to the tribe how committed you are in terms of having this strong relationship. In bold here, I just put it's the first and most important step for engagement for any tribal nation is to build that relationship. And a relationship can be built through personal avenues, could be built through professional channels, through mutual connections. Myself, I've been able to cultivate new relationships through the networks that I have. I'm a firm believer in the statement that your network is your net worth, meaning that even if you don't work in this, like Colorado, there's 2 federal recognized tribes in the state of Colorado. And if you have been planning to work excuse me, if you work with either of those 2 tribes or plan to work with those 2 tribes, but don't have a connection, I think this Western Collaborative Conservation Network and other groups, are great avenues and ways to, really look at that network and, reach out to others about, hey, I see that you're working with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. Can you, help me get connected there? And that's kind of where it's, there's multiple ways and avenues to create these relationships. And then once you create that first initial relationship, tribal nations are, well, excuse me, I should say, tribes are sovereign nations, meaning that they have the right to, self-determination and governance. And, through Trees, Water, and People's experience, we found it very important to establish alignment and, agreements through this process. First important one is, making sure that once you create that relationship and there is an aligned vision for conservation or and long-term stewardship projects, you always want to make sure you're respecting and maintaining their sovereignty, prioritizing the tribal political, environmental, cultural sovereignty. And that could be the governance system, that could be access to water, access to land. All those are important to just ensure that you as an individual or your organization or collection are prioritizing at the fullest. Honoring indigenous data sovereignty, as mentioned earlier, that tribes own the data, and it's up to them to make that final decision of how it's stored and who has access to it. Trees, Water, and People has been able to work and consult with experts in this field in helping guide us to make sure that when we do projects with tribal nations, that we consult with them. How do we make sure that if we're going to share it in our OneNote or Google Shared system, that the tribes also have equal access to that and vice versa. So that's an important thing to consider when you're establishing alignment in these projects. And then last one is just the tools for articulating agreements. Some of the formal tools you could think of when working with tribes is MOUs or MOAs. And then the informal tools could be, hiring or asking someone to do some tribal coordination and consultation. We, Trees, Water, and People have been, able to practice both a formal way and an informal way to really execute these relationships with tribes. And then I think this one is a very important one that most groups and individuals don't really consider or have never really thought of in terms of their conservation-based work, but it's the inclusion and involvement of the tribal historic preservation officers. Not all tribes have a TIPO. A TIPO is equivalent to a SHPO, which I'm assuming most of you would know that, which is a state historic preservation of. TIPO is critical. I think they are going to be, the face of how tribal nations are going to be more well respected in the face of conservation moving forward. They hold, federal, state, non-tribal NGO agencies accountable to honor their governance systems, their policies, their sovereignty. And, they have the opportunity to have oversight of all the projects happening on tribal lands and ancestral lands as well. So I highly recommend for those who want to, work with tribes, ask if they have a TIPO officer, because a TIPO will be a great resource to kind of start off a conversation with, or even just, considering looking at what projects they've been doing and who those partners were in the past. Yeah, just passing the mic. It's important to start recognizing that, passing the mic is okay. A Trees, Water, and People, not only as a land management conservation group, we also are advocates. We think it's time for us, Trees, Water. So Trees, Water, and People is a non-Indigenous led organization. So we understand that it's our time to pass the mic to these individuals who can start speaking on traditional ecosystem and the importance of it in, these, as we all move forward in facing climate change impacts together. Through TEK, it challenges new conservation groups to consider the new approach strategies. There are things that we all, have learned so much from projects or strategies and practices. And I think having a tribal mindset or indigenous mindset can really help strengthen new initiatives. And more importantly, TEK and tribal involvement is more than just protecting the land and the resource. It's cultural survival. Um, Native people get it with their land through the stories, through, ceremonies, dances. And so once, we lose the land and the resources that, our life depends on, it threatens our cultural identity and overall survival as a people. So it's important to look at how to, if you want to engage with tribal nations, it's important to look beyond just natural resources conservation. It's important to get into the depths of how to, keep identity of a people alive. Now I want to go into more just tools and tips that I love to pass over to you all for effective collaboration and partnerships. First off, where do you start when you want to build a relationship with the tribal nation? Some can be as easy as hopping on your computer and research tribal websites or visit a community. Familiarize yourself with tribal pets. I understand in Colorado, like the two tribal nations are pretty far from the Front Range, where I live, and a lot of my friends and partners and networks, are housed out of. So I get that it's challenging to be able to drive that 7, 8 hours to come and meet with folks, but I think it's really important that, as you move forward into building these relationships, you prioritize that first initial meeting to be in person. Through this process, you also want to learn who makes the decisions in the tribal nations. Each tribal nation has a different governance structure. Some tribes have like elected councils. Some have councils. Some have 4-year terms. Some have 2-year terms. And some decision makers may, like for instance, in New Mexico, for my tribe, Santo Domingo Pueblo, the governor, you may present a project to the governor, but he may defer to tribal council for that final decision. So it's important things like that to understand as you approach tribal nations to, build these collaborations and partnerships, is learn their governance structures. And if you can't find that information online or, through any other avenues, I'm always open. My channel is always open. If you need to just consult or just have, bounce ideas, I'm, happy to help. You want to conduct that SWOT analysis. Just, do your values align with the tribal priorities? and even vice versa? Do tribal values align with your organization or collaboratives kind of values? It could be played both ways. Last two, I would just say is more like, again, reaching into your bag of, your partners, your network, because I've reached out to a tribal liaison, consultant, friend for guidance and support. I know the Forest Service are now doing a much better job in getting, tribal liaisons across their different regions and their different forests. So, more organizations can continue to, build in the collaboration with tribes. So that they're there for a resource, they're there for a purpose. So I highly recommend you reaching out to them. Even I think Park Service, I believe, is starting to strengthen tribal liaison positions. And then lastly is like identify who the tribe already works with. Um, you know, for instance, if you want to work with this tribe, but you realize that they already work with a mutual partner of yours, maybe you can talk to that, non-tribal partner first to kind of get an idea. How's that experience working with the tribe? What kind of advice would you provide for us, if we wanted to reach out to them? How was that process like? How did you prepare? These are the things that will be beneficial to ask and reach out to those organizations. Some do's and do nots or don'ts, excuse me. Some do's, definitely do upfront research, understand the history, the location, the governance structure, prioritize those in-person meetings in tribal communities, be authentic and transparent. Even if you want to come in first as a representing yourself versus your organization, that's fine too. I think the more authentic you can be, the tribe is going to want to work with you more. Be community events outside of work hours. If there's a powwow, if there's like a dance or a community society event going on that's open to the public, you know, try to get out there. I think that's another great way to building, relationships with, people in the community, because it's important to get that support from the community as well as those in the more of a leadership and department level capacities. And then lastly, this is one that I learned through experience myself, is to respectfully acknowledge leadership. Just as like, us, if we ever come, like if you were to come across the president of the United States, you probably, recognize him or her as president or madam president. It's the same with tribal leaders. That title given to them is a big honor. And, you want to create that first impression by knowing that, you are being respectful of their title. The do nots is don't have a linear focus. Don't come in like thinking this is the only way it's going to work. This is the only method or strategy that scientists proven is going to be, impactful for this community. Don't come with that. Think outside the box, get creative. Uh, don't request a meeting that works for your schedule. Be flexible. You can provide some times that or dates and times that will be best work for you, but ultimately you want to leave it up to the tribe to make that decision of when they can meet. Don't come with their own agenda or priorities. I know that one may be a little challenging because you probably want to have something you want to specifically talk about, but in that first initial meeting, it could just be about like, this is who we are, what we do, building that relationship, just as anyone would like when you meet someone new for the very first time. So don't really come with a very developed agenda. Don't invite others to a meeting without getting approval. So if your organization was able to establish a meeting with a tribal nation, you don't want to show up with like X amount of other partners or individuals that mention in your email or your phone call or initial outreach. That's going to kind of create some tension, and the tribe is going to, for them, it's going to be like, well, they don't really respect our, they're not respecting our space without even consulting with us on who to invite. So make sure you get approval of who can be in that room with you on that first initial meeting or even follow-up meetings. Don't behave in a white saviorism manner. That's me as myself as a tribal nation. That's like one of the things I hate the most, is like when a group tells me we want to support your community, we want to help your community, blah blah blah. Like instead, use different terminology. Like approach it in a different way that seems more respectful, but then gives more autonomy back to the community. And don't question practices or customs that you are not used to. I remember I was in a room at one point with another non-tribal agent, excuse me, NGO that for any of their staff, they had never been in a room with tribal leadership. And the tribal leaders opened up with a prayer. And for those individuals, they were like, what's going on? Like, this is something new for us. Like, we don't like they consulted with me after. But yeah, those are things you just don't want to question. It's okay to actually talk about it after the meeting space. Want to like what like can you please provide like a kind of an idea of like what that purpose that was for, but you don't want to question any of the practices or customs in that meeting space. All right, I think now I'm pretty good on time. I want to give more time for you all for community-based discussions. I came up with three questions that I thought would hopefully kind of cultivate and curate some conversations amongst each other. I know Katie's going to break each of you all into breakout rooms to answer these three questions. And these are just guiding questions. Please feel free to expand on it or talk among their teams or your work breakout rooms a little bit more on different topics. But the first one is, does your collaborative network engage with any tribal nations or indigenous communities right now? Do you think the inclusion of tribal voices in TEK will be valuable for your collaborative or organization? And third, how can you as a conservationist practitioner support tribal-based initiatives? How will and can you integrate TEK into your collaborative framework and or project management plans? So yeah, just some guiding questions. Maybe we can post them in the chat, Katie, just that way people can come back to them. But yeah, we wanted to give you all the space to discuss amongst each other for the next, 10-15 minutes, Katie?
Yeah, roughly 10 minutes, maybe like 13.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll shut up and let you break them up into groups and yeah, we
Yeah, thank
can
you so much, James. That was really awesome. I feel like there's going to be lots of good things to discuss in these groups. So I'm going to go ahead and send everyone into their groups right now.